nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. On today's Political Correction, I'm joined by Michael Portillo and Paul Embry in the studio. Coming up this morning, is Boris Johnson planning a mass clear-out of number 10 staff and a raft of new policies to take attention away from those Downing Street parties? We'll discuss the news that MI5 has uncovered a suspected Chinese agent trying to influence MPs in Westminster, and Novak Djokovic is set to be deported from Australia after losing his appeal against his visa cancellation. That plus plenty more after the latest news headlines here on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Miranda Shunker with your top stories at 10 o'clock. Novak Djokovic says he's extremely disappointed but won't appeal deportation after losing his Australian visa battle. The country's Prime Minister welcomed the federal court's unanimous decision, saying it will keep Australians safe. It comes after lawyers representing the Australian government argued his presence could stoke anti-vaccination sentiments. The ruling means the world number one won't be able to defend his Australian Open title when the tournament starts tomorrow. The Prime Minister is reportedly planning to cull members of his top team as he fights back over the Downing Street party allegations. It comes as a growing number of Conservative MPs call for him to resign. The Sunday Times reports Boris Johnson is also devising a policy announcement blitz, including lifting the remaining coronavirus restrictions in England, as he looks to survive the publication of Sue Gray's report. Conservative Party Chairman Oliver Dowden has denied the Prime Minister needs to resign.
I don't diminish for a second that the kind of events that we've seen were totally wrong. I was angered by them. My constituents were angered by them. The whole country was angered by them. And it's absolutely right. The Prime Minister said we'll get to the bottom of them. And I'll tell you that when he responds to the House of Commons, as he's committed to doing so, he will make sure that we address the kind of culture that has allowed that to happen in the first place.
Prince Harry is fighting a Home Office decision refusing to allow him to pay for his family's security while in the UK. Harry wants to bring his son Archie and baby daughter Lilibet to visit from the US, but claims it's too dangerous without police protection. He says his US security detail doesn't have sufficient jurisdiction or intelligence information in the UK. Well, it follows an incident in London last year when his car was chased by paparazzi. The Home Office has refused to comment. 4 hostages are safe after a standoff at a synagogue in Texas. The hostage taker was killed following a 10-hour standoff which ended after a SWAT team moved in. The suspect had been demanding the release of a Pakistani neuroscientist convicted of attempting to kill US Army officers in Afghanistan. FBI Special Agent Matt DeZarno said authorities are investigating.
The 4 people who were rescued are not in need of medical attention, are with FBI agents right now, will be reunited with their family unharmed. He did not harm them in any way. We do believe from our engagement with this subject that he was singularly focused on one issue and it was not specifically related to the Jewish community.
The Defence Committee chair has warned a Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent and inevitable following a build-up of military forces along the border. Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood made the claim in the wake of a massive cyber attack on Ukraine, which left parts of the country without heat, light and access to money. Russia has been accused of increasing tensions after placing more than 100,000 soldiers along its border with Ukraine. Kazakh authorities say last week's civil unrest left 225 people dead. The state prosecutor said the figures including 19 law enforcement officers and military personnel. Protests erupted in several Kazakh cities on January the 2nd over soaring fuel prices, which escalated into mass riots in some of the country's major cities, including Almaty. The Scottish Government has called for urgent action to reduce energy bills, including cutting VAT on fuel. Ministers in Edinburgh have written to the UK Government saying there should be targeted support for low-income households. They've asked for discussions ahead of an expected increase in the energy price cap in April. And the tsunami threat around the Pacific from a huge undersea volcanic eruption has begun to recede. However, the extent of the damage to Tonga remains unclear. The country is largely uncontactable as telephone and internet links are down. The volcano erupted on Saturday, triggering warnings of 1.2-metre-high waves. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to the political correction.
Good morning. This is the Political Correction on GB News. I'm Arlene Foster, and joining me today, Michael Portillo and Paul Embry. Coming up, is Boris out to save his own skin? Suggestions the PM is planning a raft of new policies aimed to win over the voters, and a mass clear-out of number 10 staff. MI5 has uncovered a suspected Chinese agent trying to influence MPs in Westminster. And Novak Djokovic is set to be deported from Australia after losing his appeal against his visa cancellation. And should the BBC and other broadcasters start playing the national anthem again after midnight? Some MPs think they should. Tell us what you think. Plus, get involved in the conversation. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is the Political Correction. So some tough reading for the Prime Minister this morning as a new opinion poll puts Labour 10 points ahead of the Conservatives. This is up from 5 points just a week ago.
There are currently 6 Tory MPs now calling for Boris Johnson to quit. Sir Roger Gale, Andrew Bridgen, Caroline Noakes, William Wragg, Tim Loughton and Tobias Ellwood have given the PM an ultimatum, as well as Douglas Ross, MP and MSP, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives.
Now, the Sunday Times suggests that the PM will attempt to save himself by having a clear-out of Downing Street staff and announce a series of what they say are populist measures that's likely to include a number 10 workplace booze ban to end the drinking culture in Downing Street.
A freeze on the BBC licence fee for 2 years to help the cost of living.
The paper suggests he's likely to hand the military control of the battle to stop illegal immigrants in the Channel.
And we could see the remaining coronavirus restrictions lifted on the 26th of January, although that would be for England only.
Well, we thought it would be interesting to find out what the good people of Northern Ireland have to say, so we sent our reporter Dougie Beattie to Newton Ards to find out.
No, I don't think so, to be honest with you. To me, it wasn't a party. What would you call a party?
And what about the difference between him and the Queen sitting?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, the Queen was very respectful sitting there.
Yes, but them other people that had that party, to me, were the civil servants. Boris wasn't there. Did Boris know about it? I mean, you can't blame Boris for that.
Do you think Boris Johnson should resign?
No, better than that, the whole friggin' lot should stop talking about the party they had. That's a couple of months ago. Let's talk about the coronavirus. Let's talk about doing something for the public. What he was eating and drinking doesn't give a damn to anyways.
And how disrespectful do you think it was beside the Queen, the image of her and the night before they were having the party?
Sorry?
The night before Prince Philip was buried, they were having another party in Westminster.
I know, but Prince Philip was buried anyway, whether they were having a party or not. making issues about nothing, really. You know, Prince Philip's dead and gone, and the Queen, she'll miss him more than anybody. And she is one wonderful wee woman. I think she's the best wee woman in the world, and the only royal that's kept herself clean and perfect. She's an example to all of them, and what she is, the head of the Church of England, she has never let the church down. Perfection is what she is. I love her dearly.
Do you think Boris Johnson should resign?
Yes.
Why?
I think he's just made far too many mistakes and he's just making an idiot of himself, basically.
Do you think Boris Johnson should resign?
Yes.
Why?
Because he's lied to the people. And he shouldn't do that. And other people's parents have died and had to go through that alone, and he's at a party. So, yeah, I think he should resign.
Do you think Boris Johnson should resign?
Yes.
Why?
Because he's just not going anywhere at this stage. He just seems to be falling into one thing to the other.
Do you think Boris Johnson should resign?
Yes.
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Because he's told that many lies to the general public. If you can't trust the government, who can you trust? Our politicians are bad enough. You know? So, no, a no for me.
Boris Johnson, do you think he should resign?
He's a dead man walking, only doesn't do it yet.
You think so?
Yes.
Why do you think he should resign?
The list's too long. The list as long as your arm.
I think he should resign. Yeah, and the reason being, he's expecting everybody else to follow rules and guidelines, which he tells us what we'll have to do, but then blatantly turns around and they do their own thing. And like to say he thought it was a business meeting, I never known a Prime Minister to take their wife to a business meeting. You know, lies, and goddamn lies, that's all it is.
Well, there's some views from Newtownards in Northern Ireland about Boris's future. Paul, what a week it has been in relation to not just the leadership of the country, but politics in general.
I mean, I have to say, I think the government is in danger of losing all moral authority on this. I think that time is fast approaching. In my experience, there's one thing that voters hate, it's hypocrisy. It's the idea of politicians saying to them, you know, this is what you should do. We're imposing these restrictions, which you have to abide by. And then all of the while behind the scenes, they're shanting it up. They're having their shindigs, etc. And I think when that moral authority goes for any government, it's very difficult to get it back. But I think the other thing it proves, actually, is that when they were standing in those press conferences night after night trying to convince the public that this was some kind of deadly plague and these extreme restrictions were all necessary to stop the NHS from collapsing, to stop hundreds of thousands of people from dying. I'm not trying to underplay the virus, but clearly they didn't believe their own propaganda. Clearly, you know, saying one thing to the public, that you have to do this social distancing, otherwise you're going to kill granny and the NHS is going to collapse. If you're actually behind the scenes not following it yourself, it shows that you really don't believe what you're saying. And for me, I think that's the biggest story here.
And I think Dominic Lawson was reflecting on that today in the Sunday Times, wasn't he?
Yes, quite an interesting piece here in the Sunday Times. His take on this really is that, you know, Boris never really believed in the restrictions himself. He is a good time guy, Boris, and he is a libertarian by nature. The argument is that he was kind of forced into these restrictions by cabinet colleagues and by civil servants, never believed in them himself, and sort of in a way demonstrated that by his continuing lifestyle. But obviously this does cause an enormous amount of resentment. It's not just Boris, of course. I'm not taking blame away from Boris, but it's remarkable that it's not just Boris. It's a very large group of people in Downing Street. And I think one of the things that affected them was, I would go so far as to call it a lack of humanity, actually, a lack of empathy. They had devised these rules. They were imposing these rules. They knew that people weren't allowed to go to funerals. They knew that they weren't allowed to be with relatives when they were dying. And yet they had no empathy for these regulations that they had made. This is what I think really makes people sick. It's almost beyond hypocrisy. A lack of empathy is an even worse charge. And I think if Deanna were here today, I think of someone like her. She's a working class representative of her community. Yeah. These people in the Red Wall seats have sold themselves, and I think quite genuinely, as having complete empathy with their constituents. And now to be tarnished with the brand of the government, which apparently has no empathy for people in the country, for the regulations made, I think that is what is deeply serious for the government.
What I think beggars belief is that at no point, apparently, did anybody within government or the civil service stop and say, look, guys, this is not a good idea. You know, this, because these things leak out, they always do. And it seems that nobody thought that, you know, having these wine parties and going into the garden and having a bit of a get together, and then the thing that we hear the night before Prince Philip's funeral. I mean, surely someone's internal alarm would have gone off and says, look, when this comes out, this is going to look terrible, so we'd best not do it.
It's even worse again, I think, because Martin Reynolds, the Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, sends out the email inviting people to bring your own booze. You have quite recently been in government. Would your Private Secretary to the First Minister have behaved like that? Could your Private Secretary send out that email?
No, and I think it speaks to, as you rightly say, that sort of culture in Downing Street of we can do whatever we like, because we're in number 10 Downing Street. And yes, there's all these rules for the general public, but actually we're here in Downing Street and we'll do whatever we like. I mean, I think there is no way any of and I had fabulous private secretaries actually through my time in government in Northern Ireland. And there were times that they came to me and said, we don't think this is a good idea. We don't think that you should do that. They would never have done that in terms of bring your own booze. Never.
Is it more than... I mean, Michael, is it more than poor political judgment? Is there a sense of entitlement amongst people like Boris Johnson, who have had a very privileged upbringing? You know, the rest of us just simply can't comprehend the privilege and the wealth. And does that breed a sense of entitlement? You know, he goes to Eton, he chooses whatever career he wants to go into, and the rules don't really apply to me because of who I am and where I've come from. Is that what is contributing to some of this stuff?
I don't know whether it is the Etonian side of his character that has led to that, but the testimony from all of his career is that he doesn't think the rules apply to him. And indeed, in many ways, they haven't. He is the first Prime Minister we've ever had about whom we've been uncertain how many children he has. I mean, you know, he has done all sorts of things which no previous Prime Minister has done. So, in a way, he's been right that rules don't apply to him. And in a way, the public has quite liked the fact that rules don't apply to him. It's been part of his popularity until now. I think all of this has made an enormous difference. But it does strike me there's a terrific theme to the news at the moment, which is entitlement. You know, Boris Johnson we just talked about, but, you know, did Djokovic think he was entitled to enter Australia? Did Prince Andrew think he was entitled to behave as he wished? Does Prince Harry think that he's entitled to go on having publicly funded security in the United Kingdom? And I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if these things affect one another. I mean, the judgment in Australia, the decision that was made by a politician in Australia may have been affected by this. After all, the Queen is Australia's Queen as well, and they read about what's going on with Boris. And I think, you know, Djokovic has been on the receiving end of a tidal wave against people feeling that they're entitled, of whom Boris is one.
Well, we're going to talk about Djokovic later on in the show and that decision that the Australian government has made. But we've now got Carl Hennigan, Professor Carl Hennigan, who is joining us to talk about the COVID restrictions and the fact that we're now hearing, Professor, that these restrictions may go as soon as 10 days from England.
Yeah, thanks, Arlene. I was just listening to your debate. Fascinating. I think it's interesting to note within about 4 weeks how the debate has radically changed. If you go back to about a month ago, we were having the new SAGE advice and the advisory modelling saying we should go into further restrictions, and the government railed against that. And what's happened here is in that month, we've seen infections go up to very high as they do at this time of year. But what we've also seen is them come off naturally as viruses do. And I think what's happening now is we're seeing a complete shift in the debate. And with that, as people's fear and anxiety come off, what's happening is they're looking back in time. I get the thing about the parties. It's a moral outrage that comes with that. But key is, in my lifetime, I never thought I'd sit in a position where somebody could say you can't go to the birth of your children, or you can't go to the death of parents. That was completely, wholly wrong policies to have. And many of the policies and restrictions we've had have come from a small group of people. I think there are some words you could look to, immaturity as opposed to empathy. I just think these people are not mature in their decision making and therefore not mature in the policies that they've said. One of your guests mentioned about the beliefs. It comes down to risk perception. At what point, where do you think you are within COVID affecting you? How concerned are you? How anxious are you? And that defines the policies you will support or make. And as we've got to this point now, people are looking back, for instance, like the masks in school, and very clearly saying, where's the evidence? Well, actually, there is no high quality evidence. So if you're going to intervene with a policy for millions of children, we need legislation that says there's clearly the benefits outweigh the harms. And that's not the case. And that's why you've now got a challenge to the government saying if you carry on intervene, we're going to take this to legal proceedings because many of these interventions haven't worked. And now we're starting to question that. And this debate is what we now need to have.
Carl, I was always very puzzled that the government said it was following the science, as though there was such a thing as the science. That it didn't seem to recognise it had a broader responsibility to balance the science against other considerations in society, like keeping the economy going and people's mental health and so on, that it didn't establish another committee, or maybe set of committees, that represented those other aspects, the non-health aspects, so that politicians could take a balanced view of their decision-making. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, it did surprise me. And I think if you go back to the whole of 2020, we remember the debate was about suppression and zero COVID. And as we came out of measures, it took an awful long time to come out of measures. May, June, July, before we actually got back to some normality, despite the data being very clear and dropping. What you're alluding to is one single measure of healthcare, COVID, has dominated the debate for the last 2 years, despite rising problems in other areas of healthcare, the economy, social care, care homes, all of these features, particularly mental health. And look at the devastation now we've got to pick up with our children, education. Remembering about half of all mental health problems become apparent by about the age of 14. So if you're going to decide to intervene at that point, you better be pretty clear you've got good information in the room. Now, I think in 2021, we got a lot of things wrong. And one of the major things we got wrong is failing to understand that the NHS has to prepare for winter surges in the Northern Hemisphere from acute respiratory pathogens. It needs about 20% extra capacity and a flexible approach to how to move staff around so we don't end up in a crisis like the petrol station problem where we're suddenly saying people can't get in the hospital and we're going to have to lock down again. We could be now having a debate saying the NHS cannot be used to set policy from this point on in the future. What do we have to prepare for? And if you look at the numbers, it's quite simple. It's about 20% extra beds at this time of year. Remember, in acute respiratory pathogens lead to increases every single year around December and January.
Listen, Carl, we could talk about this all day, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. I think this is something we're going to keep on talking about. But coming up, IKEA and Next are reducing the pay of unvaccinated employees who need to self-isolate because of COVID. Is this the right thing to do, or is it unfair? We'll be discussing that after the weather.
Let's have a look at the weather for you. The UK is looking like a mixed picture, a band of rain moving across the country. So in the details, southwest England seeing a few showers this morning, some sunny spells developing. A bit on the mild side, though, double figures for most. For the southeast of England, variable cloud. There could be the odd light shower, but most places are dry. Temperatures around average, light winds. Cloud and rain continuing to move southwards and across Wales, though perhaps Cardiff should be dry until we approach early afternoon. The temperatures there about 10 Celsius. Heading to the Midlands then, and after a bright morning, cloud and rain slowly moving in from the north as we approach midday. A little bit cooler, temperatures of about 7. That weather front will clear northern England, allowing the skies to brighten. Plenty of sunshine by lunchtime, but then a chilly northerly breeze. Highs of 7 towards the coast, sunny spells and a few scattered showers for northern parts of Scotland as well today. Elsewhere across the country, dry, plenty of sunshine. Temperatures in Edinburgh just topping at 6. Northern Ireland will see plenty of blue skies, some cloud drifting through, but it will be dry. A chilly feel to the air with temperatures of 7. For this evening, the cloud and rain will clear south. Turning colder, a frost developing not long after dark.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Now, many of you have been getting in touch with us. Michael, I think you've got some GB views.
Indeed. Stuart says, yes, we are all angry about Partygate. But let's remind ourselves that 80% of MPs lied to the British public regarding respecting the result of the referendum.
Yes, and then on the national anthem, we've had a few views in on that. Jeff is saying the BBC is already irrelevant. GB News should play the national anthem.
Oh, how about that?
And on the same subject, Pat says, yes, it would be great if it were brought back. It would begin the pride that has been missing in Britain for so long.
Derek says, the national anthem should now be Madness by Madness, reflecting the mental state of the people of this country, especially the maintenance media.
Yes, and Michael says, let's have GB News set by example. Play the national anthem at 12 midnight each day. We need to preserve our British way of life as it is unique in the world.
And June says, it is the British Broadcasting Channel and I fully support them playing the national anthem daily unless they want to change their name. Are they not proud to support Britain?
That was a point that was made on the opening evening of GB News. I remember that. Marion says, I can remember the national anthem being played in the 50s and 60s around midnight on TV, and you would stand and sing and then watch the white spot fade away on the television screen.
Yes, we'll not show our age by remembering any of that.
You two remember that, I'm afraid I don't.
All right.
Yes. And of course, Tony says, here's a fan, wonderful to see Michael Portillo presenting today. He is what the Conservative Party needs right now, a sad loss to politics. There you are, Michael.
I'd rather be here, Eileen. Thank you.
So before the break, we were talking about the inhumanity of the COVID regulations. Paul, you noticed a tweet this week about that.
Yeah, it was a tweet that was published by the Labour Party, my party, and I found the whole thing incredible, actually. They were clearly, as you would expect, trying to make political capital out of the government's hypocrisy. But in doing so, they referred to the words of an NHS nurse called Jenny, and we can see her words on the screen there, where she talks about her being on duty on the day that, you know, the Downing Street party took place, and that she was talking to a man who was in the hospital car park and his wife was dying in the hospital and he was weeping on the phone and begging to be let through the doors to spend the last moments of her life with her. And sadly, she died in the end. But it just struck me, actually, that as a piece of propaganda, it's pretty appalling because it was being presented as if, you know, these restrictions were virtuous and they were necessary and Jenny did absolutely the right thing. These are the sacrifices that people were making while Downing Street was partying. And actually, it just seemed to me to be monstrous.
Yeah.
And you know, the lack of humanity there. What sort of society is it? What sort of health service is it where you have a husband crying and weeping in the car park and begging to be let in to see his dying wife, and almost like a computer says no attitude? Well, the rules are the rules, my friend, and you can't come through because there is this greater good. And again, that's not to underplay the virus, but surely, even with COVID, we can allow people to go into a hospital to spend their last few moments. So I just thought it was a terrible piece of propaganda, and actually wasn't the main story.
You make such a good point, and what's delighting me about our discussion this morning is that we haven't just spoken about Boris. We've gone to the origin of the issue. The origin of the issue was restrictions that I believe were unnecessary, that were inhumane, that were cruel. And that needs to be remembered, partly because it's extraordinary that these restrictions were brought in within a democratic society. And it's also important to remember this because it could all happen again.
And it could, Michael, but I mean, I have said to you when we've been discussing this, as someone in government at the time, as someone who was being told, if you don't do this, so many people are going to die. And I do also recall when my party tried to take a different route on restrictions in late 2020, the media in Northern Ireland went to town on us as if we were people who were putting people at risk. We were going to allow people to die. And actually, it was a real feeding frenzy.
And that's why this discussion matters, because we have to offer some protection to politicians in the future who may face these decisions again.
And I don't think we ever properly, as a nation, examined the possibility of having a targeted approach, of saying, look, for the vast majority of people in this country, COVID does not present a serious threat. It only presents a serious threat to a small minority of people, elderly people, vulnerable people. Now, that, of course, doesn't mean that you don't protect those people, but you try so far as you can to throw a shield around those people whilst allowing the rest of the population to go about their business. And actually, I think that's the position that we're probably going to have to move to at some point in the future anyway. And some of the experts are suggesting we are. Look, you know, we can't just keep giving the whole population vaccines every 6 months. Yeah. So we'll give regular vaccines to the most vulnerable. We have to live with the virus and allow people to go about their business. Well, some of us have been saying, well, that should have been the approach from the beginning.
Well, I suppose it was the knowledge that we had at the beginning, which was very limited at that time about COVID and about how to deal with these things. But anyway, we're going to move on to our next story, which is about Next and IKEA. And they're the latest retailers to confirm that they're going to take changes to the sick pay for unvaccinated workers. The current rule is that unvaccinated people who come into contact with positive coronavirus cases have to self-isolate for 10 full days. This is shorter, of course, if you're fully vaccinated. And then unvaccinated workers at Next now will only be eligible for statutory sick pay, which is set at £96.35 per week during their 10 days of isolation, unless there are mitigating circumstances. Paul, you noticed this story because essentially they're having a pay cut if they're unvaccinated.
Yeah, and I think it's really questionable, actually. You know, these people are, by and large, healthy people who probably don't have COVID themselves, but may have come into contact with somebody, may have actually had COVID recently, so they've developed the antibodies and whatever, and may not pose a serious threat at all to other people, but have been told, you know, you've got to self-isolate, of course, but for the period that you will be self-isolating, as you say, Arlene, you'll get only the statutory sick pay instead of your contractual sick pay. And my view is that if somebody, be it government or whoever, is forcing healthy people, which most of them will be, to isolate to a degree where they can't attend work, then why should those people suffer a cut in wages just because they haven't agreed to have a particular medical intervention? I think it's really questionable, and I would like to see trade unions such as USDA, the Shop Workers Union, come out and you know, criticise this policy.
It's very interesting. It's obviously a nudge policy. It's one of these many nudge policies trying to get people to get vaccinated. I approve of people being vaccinated. I'm unhappy with people who are unvaccinated. However, I don't believe in forcing people, and I think it's now awfully late in the day. I believe we're about to declare victory over the virus. And at this late stage, to be docking people's pay seems to be absolutely wrong.
And particularly at a point where last week Next announced record profits. Now, we all know about the boom in online shopping during the lockdown. So it seems to me to be morally wrong that a company that's just announced record profits can cut the pay of people in this way. So in principle, I think it's an absolutely incorrect decision.
It's quite interesting to me too that it was the Conservative backbenchers voting against coronavirus passports just before Christmas that forced the government not to introduce any new restrictions, which I think put them on the right course. So if you think the government has done the right thing in recent weeks, I think probably it has. It's actually due to the backbenchers, I think 100 of them, who gave them a terrible shock. But time to move on, but still in the House of Commons, how did a Chinese spy manage to get so close to the heart of Westminster? We'll be discussing that after the news.
It's 10:34, your top stories this hour. Novak Djokovic says he's extremely disappointed but won't appeal deportation after losing his Australian visa battle. The country's Prime Minister welcomed the federal court's unanimous decision, saying it will keep Australians safe. The ruling means the world number one won't be able to defend his Australian Open title when the tournament starts tomorrow. The Prime Minister is reportedly planning a reshuffle of his cabinet as he fights back over the Downing Street party allegations. It comes as a growing number of Conservative MPs call for him to resign. The Sunday Times reports Boris Johnson is also devising a policy announcement blitz, including lifting the remaining coronavirus restrictions in England. Prince Harry is fighting a Home Office decision refusing to allow him to pay for his family's security while in the UK. Harry claims it's too dangerous without police protection and his US security detail doesn't have sufficient jurisdiction. The Home Office has refused to comment. And the chair of the Defence Committee warns a Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent and inevitable. Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood made the claim following a cyber attack which left parts of the country without heat, light and access to money. It's believed Russia has placed more than 100,000 soldiers along its border with Ukraine. The Scottish Government has called for urgent action to reduce energy bills, including cutting VAT on fuel. Ministers in Edinburgh have written to the UK Government saying there should be targeted support for low-income households. They've asked for discussions ahead of an expected increase in the energy price cap in April. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll have more for you at the top of the hour.
Hello there, I'm Imam.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Many of you have been getting in touch. Richard says, wait for this, a clear out of number 10 should begin with Carrie Johnson, who had undue influence on Boris over the wallpaper.
There we go. And Janice, she says that the majority of us don't care about the parties. We want Boris to stay.
Marianne says, I find it amazing that we're asking a Prime Minister to resign on the grounds of morality because of cheese and wine parties, yet we allowed a Prime Minister, Tony Blair, to remain as PM when he took us into an illegal and immoral war. This leak is purely aimed at getting Boris out.
Quite an interesting variety of view here, isn't it? Jean says, shame it turned out like this. Notice the implication that she thinks it's turned out.
Yeah.
Yes, Boris has made some bad choices and taken some very bad advice, but let's also please note he's done an amazing job in many areas. Amazing COVID hospitals and vaccines, something in that.
And I think that's the point that Dan Hannon was making in the Daily Telegraph today, that despite everything, look at what he's done on COVID, on the economy, and we all knew about his foibles when he became Prime Minister. On the national anthem, Hopkins says they should definitely play it on TV as well, especially in Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee year.
And on energy prices, Roger says, why should low-income homes in the UK subsidise other nations with foreign aid by paying high energy prices? The government should drop the surcharge now.
So a wide range of views, keep sending them in to us. But we're going to move on now to another issue. Are we too obsessed with James Bond films? That's what the Chinese government seemed to think after MI5 uncovered a suspected Chinese agent trying to influence MPs in Westminster.
Well, an email was sent by the Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, with a warning about a lawyer called Christine Lee. In that message, Sir Lindsay claimed that she had engaged in political interference activities on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party and had engaged with members here at Parliament and with a now defunct all-party parliamentary group called Chinese in Britain.
Now, Christine Lee has been banned from Parliament, but it's believed that no further action is due to be taken and no deportation was planned. This is quite an incredible story, Michael. Is this something that you were aware of when you were in Parliament, the influence of other states in democracy?
No, frankly, I wasn't. I'm glad you asked me that question to begin with, because I was about to launch into saying how unbelievably naive Parliament has been about this. Yeah. But it is worth, checking oneself. How much did I think about this in my day? Frankly, I did not.
Yeah.
But it is deeply surprising, is it not, that a member of Parliament would accept, I'm referring to Barry Gardiner MP, hundreds of thousands of pounds. It was all declared, of course, but, do you not raise a question mark? Do you not have some suspicion when someone gives you hundreds of thousands of pounds to employ staff? But Parliament apparently has been absolutely wide open to this. And I think that China and presumably Russia and maybe other actors as well must be absolutely laughing at us that we leave ourselves so broadly open to this sort of interference.
I mean, one thing that struck me is that apparently there's been rumours about this woman for years around the corridors of power. So why has it taken so long to effectively flush her out? I mean, it's right and proper that people who are unduly trying to influence the system, the political system, on behalf of other states are brought to book. But I would say also, though, that I do think we need to be a little bit careful about exercising, moral judgment on this, because the truth is all countries, all big players do this kind of thing, don't they? I mean, in terms of the world of espionage, I've no doubt that the UK has its agents overseas trying to do their job in terms of getting information out of politicians and business leaders, etc. The US clearly does it. So is it really that unusual? And are we morally in any position to condemn China for doing what many countries in the West, frankly?
I wasn't trying to strike a moral position.
No.
Of course, that is what governments do. And, Yeah, it's what the British do as well. But what I'm saying is, given that we do that, how can we have been so naive as to leave ourselves open to this? I'm reminded, by the way, of a rather good joke, because more than 10 years ago, there was a member of Parliament called Mike Hancock, who was accused of having employed and indeed slept with a woman who was alleged to be a Russian spy. And he made a rather good joke about himself. He said, of course she was a spy. Why else would she have slept with me?
Self-deprecation.
I mean, Paul, you make a point that all countries are doing this, but is it not the case that China has been investing a lot of money in our infrastructure, in our industries, in our universities as well? And so they are slightly different in terms of the attention that they're putting into not just the UK, of course, but right across the globe they're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, China is in expansionist mode
Yeah.
in all sorts of ways, economically and militarily. It's catching up with the US and arguably will overtake the US in the not too distant future. And it's absolutely right, I think, that we are on our guard and that we're cautious. I mean, I regard the Chinese regime as a deeply authoritarian regime. But at the same time, I think there are other countries around the world with terrible human rights records who we are very, very happy to do business with, which is, as I say, why we need to be careful about exercising moral judgments on this front. But yeah, we need to be wary, and where people are trying to infiltrate the system, we need to flush them out. But does it need to be the beginning of some kind of new Cold War? I hope not.
People are very incautious when they're offered money. You mentioned the universities. I'm very worried about my university, Cambridge University. It's taken bundles of money from the Chinese. And what does that mean? It means that influences the courses that it's prepared to offer. It influences the people that it's prepared to invite, the views that it's prepared to entertain. There are examples of public schools that have taken Chinese money and have set up campuses in China who are now being told what the curriculum can be. So I'm afraid when people arrive with money, we tend to leave our ethics at the door or muffle them under the piles of cash. I think it is pretty worrying.
Was the timing of the announcement a bit coincidental? I know the government has said, well, the timing of the release of this woman's name, and obviously it was splashed all over the newspapers, and it took Boris Johnson off of the front pages for a fleeting moment. The government said, well, that was nothing to do with us. That was just the security services. You would know whether that's true or not, Michael. It is. Well, former Defence Secretary.
The government is so clever, it organised the Prince Andrew thing and the Djokovic thing at the same time. But still, Boris is on the front pages.
He is indeed. But something else that's causing a lot of concern is Russia. And the United States officials believe that Russia is plotting to stage acts of provocation to create a pretext to invade Ukraine. A Pentagon spokesman said Russian operatives were planning a false flag operation to allow Moscow to accuse Ukraine of preparing an attack. Russia has dismissed the claims. And it comes after a week of US-Russian talks aimed at diffusing tensions. Now, Keir Giles is a senior consulting fellow with the Russia and Eurasia programme at Chatham House, and he's joining us now. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, there's a lot of concern this morning, despite all of the other noise, about what's happening on the border between Ukraine and Russia, Keir.
Absolutely right. And I see your caption at the moment says a Tory MP says Russian invasion is inevitable and imminent. The problem is, no, it isn't. There are so many other things that Russia could do to try and emphasize its point and emphasize its demands to NATO and the United States to effectively give Eastern Europe back to Russia that don't involve rolling tanks across the border in Ukraine, because that's messy, it's unpredictable, it's expensive. And there are so many other ways in which Russia could emphasize its point. We've seen the cyber attacks on Ukrainian websites over the last few days. We've seen suspicious activity around NATO's civilian communications infrastructure up in the far north. Many other things that Russia could do that are a lot safer and more predictable and less expensive than actually attacking Ukraine. You do hear people saying that this big military build-up against the Ukrainian borders that Russia has done is, as they put it, too big not to be used. But the point is, it already has been used. It's frightened the United States and NATO and European politicians into talking to Russia about the demands and the guarantees that NATO will roll itself back, that they shouldn't even be having that conversation about in the first place.
Yeah.
Keir, I was Defence Secretary at the time when NATO was beginning its expansion, taking in the former satellite states that had been controlled by the Soviet Union, moving up very close to the Russian border with NATO. Do you buy the argument that Russia feels provoked by NATO, that the military exercises, for example, that NATO conducts in the Black Sea are a provocation? Should we in any way allow the idea to gain a footing that Russia has a sphere of influence beyond the borders strictly of Russia?
Well, that gets to the heart of the problem. And there are two distinct issues here. First of all, it's wrong to say that NATO being close to Russia is what provokes all of this hostile activity by Russia, because Russia was perfectly happy to engage in these small wars around its periphery when NATO was nowhere near. In the few years after the end of the Soviet Union, for example, we saw that happening all the way around Russia's south. But at the same time, the deeper issue is Russia thinking that it is entitled to dictate how these other countries around its periphery in Eastern Europe manage their affairs, to say what their foreign policy and their security policy should be, whether they should be allowed to join NATO or whether they should come under Russian dominion. And you've had a deeply unpleasant character, the ambassador of Russia to the Parliamentary for the Assembly for the Council of Europe, just over the last couple of days, stating openly that what Russia wants is a return to 1917. And that's just a more explicit way of saying what Moscow is demanding. The trouble is, in 1917, countries like Finland and Poland that are sovereign, independent nations were part of the Russian Empire. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to occupy those countries again, but it does mean they want to determine those countries' future, regardless of what the millions of people living there actually want.
Yeah, and I'm very interested by that, because it is really, is it not, Keir, about forcing the narrative here, that Russia are trying to force a narrative as to where their place is in the world, actually?
They've been extremely successful in that, in presenting Russia as a great power, as they put it, but a great power in a very 19th century sense, from the age of empires, when, yes, there weren't these sovereign, independent countries that could actually make up their own mind in between the great powers. And they've also been very successful in framing the conversation we're having at the moment. Everybody's presenting this as being about Ukraine and about Ukraine not joining NATO. And the conversation, as Michael's already alluded to, is about NATO not expanding further towards Russia. But if you look at what Russia is actually asking for in reality in their draft treaties, it's not security guarantees for Russia. It's taking security guarantees away from all of those countries that it wants to overrule and to dominate. It is NATO rolling back all of that expansion and taking away the protection that those people want to have in order to determine their own futures free from Moscow.
Keir, very, very briefly, is there a way that NATO can help to de-escalate?
Well, unfortunately, NATO isn't even being asked. For as far as Russia's concerned, it's a conversation between the great powers. They think the US runs NATO. So their demands, even explicitly in the treaties, is US, you tell NATO what to do. So NATO, unfortunately, is almost as out of the picture in terms of determining what happens as the EU is, which has been completely irrelevant and sidelined.
Well, thank you so much, Keir, for joining us. It's a fascinating piece that's happening outside of the usual realms of what we're discussing. So it's really good to have you on this morning.
Now, should the BBC restart playing the national anthem on television in the middle of the night to foster, quotes, unity and pride in our nation? That's what the Romford MP, Andrew Rossendale, believes as we head towards the Queen's Platinum Jubilee later this year. We've had lots of your comments in on that as well. Paul, should they?
I didn't know they'd stopped, to be honest.
Are you saying you're not up that late to notice?
Well, I remember that as a youngster it would be played at close down, and it would often wake me up if I'd fallen asleep after a few beers on the sofa. The national anthem would wake you up, and that was quite a good thing. I think the argument against it from the BBC is, look, they just go straight to the BBC News channel now. So there isn't a traditional close down as such. But look, if it were to come back in some form, I'm quite relaxed about that. Andrew Rossendale, the Romford MP, also made the argument that kids should be singing it in schools on a weekly basis as well, which I have to say I don't think I would support, because I think there's a danger you end up slipping into jingoism, and they have it in America where they pledge allegiance to the flag in schools, salute the flag, sing the national anthem, etc. And in my view, that's not really our kind of patriotism. But I think our patriotism is more sort of understated rather than an in-your-face patriotism. So if it were to come back, all well and good, but I don't think it's a huge burning issue for many people.
I agree with you, but I'm very struck by the unwisdom of the BBC and the political ineptness of the BBC. I mean, it does depend on the government. I wish it didn't and I wish it wouldn't, for the licence fee. So why do provocative things like drop the national anthem? I mean, this is a gift to people like Andrew Rossendale. It's a gift to the enemies of the BBC in the Conservative Party, and I admit that they do exist. I mean, the deal with the licence fee is that you get public service broadcasting, that you use the word British in your title, that you are a global brand. Now, certain responsibilities, it seems to me, go with that, and I would have thought to remove the national anthem was a provocation. But a number of people have suggested that GBNews take up the national anthem. It rather reminds me of when British Airways stopped using the Union flag, so Virgin Airways took it up the next day. So
Margaret Thatcher famously threw a hanky over
it. I don't know whether the GBNews management can hear us.
Well, I'm sure they're listening to us and watching our every utterance here this morning, and more than that, listening to our viewers, because we've had quite a lot of GB views in this morning, absolutely saying that this is the national broadcaster. Why wouldn't we play the national anthem? And I'm interested in what you say, Paul, about that's not our sort of way of doing things. We're more understated. Of course, in Northern Ireland, there's quite a lot of flag flying and people are very keen to be identified with one side or another. But it brings me back to, do you remember Emily Thornberry and that incident where...
Don't I just?
Yes, exactly. Made the comment about flying flags and white van man and all of
the
that.
Rochester and Stroud by-election, I think it was in 2014, and it really goes to the heart of the issue with today's Labour Party, and I think how that they are just out of touch with provincial Britain and working class Britain. That Emily, who I like, by the way, Emily Thornberry, but she saw this white van outside a house with the St George's flag and clearly thought it was so noteworthy and so unusual that it was worth tweeting, and obviously had to resign. I think she was a shadow Attorney General at the time and had to resign within 24 hours. But really does go to the heart of...
She clearly has never canvassed in Northern Ireland.
Well.
But staying with us, because in the next hour we'll have plenty to talk about, including the latest on a bad week for Prince Andrew and Novak Djokovic's visa trouble. But more on that in a moment. This is GB News.
Let's have a look at the weather for you. The UK is looking like a mixed picture, a band of rain moving across the country. So in the details, southwest England seeing a few showers this morning, some sunny spells developing. A bit on the mild side, though, double figures for most. For the southeast of England, variable cloud. There could be the odd light shower, but most places are dry. Temperatures around average, light winds. Cloud and rain continuing to move southwards and across Wales, though perhaps Cardiff should be dry until we approach early afternoon. The temperatures there about 10 Celsius. Heading to the Midlands then, and after a bright morning, cloud and rain slowly moving in from the north as we approach midday. A little bit cooler, temperatures of about 7. That weather front will clear northern England, allowing the skies to brighten. Plenty of sunshine by lunchtime, but then a chilly northerly breeze. Highs of 7 towards the coast, sunny spells and a few scattered showers for northern parts of Scotland as well today. Elsewhere across the country, dry, plenty of sunshine. Temperatures in Edinburgh just topping at 6. Northern Ireland will see plenty of blue skies, some cloud drifting through, but it will be dry. A chilly feel to the air with temperatures of 7. For this evening, the cloud and rain will clear south. Turning colder, a frost developing not long after dark.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for...
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Imam.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. On today's Political Correction, I'm joined by Michael Portillo and Paul Embry in the studio. Coming up this morning, Prince Andrew has been stripped of his military titles and royal patronages. Novak Djokovic is set to be deported from Australia after losing his appeal against his visa cancellation. And we'll be talking to Imam Ashmal Mazur about what issues matter to him in Common Ground. That plus plenty more after the latest news headlines here on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Miranda Shunker. The top stories at 11 o'clock. Novak Djokovic is leaving Australia after losing his Australian visa battle. The country's Prime Minister welcomed the federal court's unanimous decision, saying it will keep Australians safe. It comes after lawyers representing the Australian government argued his presence could stoke anti-vaccination sentiments. The ruling means the world number one won't be able to defend his Australian Open title when the tournament starts tomorrow. The Prime Minister is reportedly planning a reshuffle of his cabinet as he fights back over the Downing Street party allegations. It comes as a growing number of Conservative MPs call for him to resign. The Sunday Times reports Boris Johnson is also devising a policy announcement blitz, including lifting the remaining coronavirus restrictions in England as he looks to survive the publication of Sue Gray's report. Conservative Party Chairman Oliver Dowden has rejected calls for the Prime Minister's resignation.
I don't diminish for a second that the kind of events that we've seen were totally wrong. I was angered by them. My constituents were angered by them. The whole country was angered by them. And it's absolutely right. The Prime Minister said we'll get to the bottom of them. And I'll tell you that when he responds to the House of Commons, as he's committed to doing so, he will make sure that we address the kind of culture that has allowed that to happen in the first place.
Well, meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said Boris Johnson needs to resign now as he's degraded the office of Prime Minister.
I think he broke the law. I think he's as good as admitted that he broke the law. And after all, Downing Street has now apologised to the Queen for some of the parties that have gone on. And I know that the government's holding position is let's all wait for the Sue Gray report. But I think it's pretty obvious what's happened. There's industrial-scale partying that's been going on at Downing Street. Not much of it is really denied.
Prince Harry is fighting a Home Office decision refusing to allow him to pay for his family's security while in the UK. Harry wants to bring his son Archie and baby daughter Lilibet to visit from the US, but claims it's too dangerous without police protection. He says his US security detail doesn't have sufficient jurisdiction or intelligence information in the UK. Well, it follows an incident in London last year when his car was chased by paparazzi. The Home Office has refused to comment. 16 and 17-year-olds in England will be able to get a COVID booster jab from tomorrow. About 40,000 teenagers will be initially eligible for the top-up dose, with that number rising to 600,000 in the coming weeks. Previously, boosters were only recommended for those who were clinically vulnerable. 4 hostages are safe after a standoff at a synagogue in Texas. The hostage taker was killed following a 10-hour standoff which ended after a SWAT team moved in. The suspect had been demanding the release of a Pakistani neuroscientist convicted of attempting to kill US Army officers in Afghanistan. FBI Special Agent Matt Tisano said authorities are investigating.
4 people who were rescued are not in need of medical attention, are with FBI agents right now, will be reunited with their family unharmed. He did not harm them in any way. We do believe from our engagement with this subject that he was singularly focused on one issue and it was not specifically related to the Jewish community.
The Defence Committee chair has warned a Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent and inevitable following a build-up of military forces along the border. Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood made the claim in the wake of a cyber attack on Ukraine, which left parts of the country without heat, light and access to money. Russia has been accused of increasing tensions after placing more than 100,000 soldiers along its border with Ukraine. The Scottish Government has called for urgent action to reduce energy bills, including cutting VAT on fuel. Ministers in Edinburgh have written to the UK government saying there should be targeted support for low-income households. They've asked for discussions ahead of an expected increase in the energy price cap in April. The tsunami threat around the Pacific from a huge undersea volcanic eruption has begun to recede. However, the extent of the damage to Tonga remains unclear. The country is largely uncontactable as telephone and internet links are down. The volcano erupted on Saturday, triggering warnings of 1.2-metre high waves. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more now as it happens. Now let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. This is The Political Correction. I'm Arlene Foster, and joining me today in the studio, Michael Portillo and Paul Embry. Coming up, this week Prince Andrew was stripped of his royal patronages and military titles in a decision signed off by the Duke's mother, the Queen. But is this enough to restore the damage caused by the allegations against him, which of course he denies? Novak Djokovic is leaving Australia after losing his appeal against his visa cancellation. Plus, our regular feature, Common Ground, returns this week. We speak to Imam Ashmal Mazur about what's important to his community. We want you to get involved in all of our conversations. Email gbnews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Good morning and welcome back to The Political Correction. So this week saw the Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, stripped of his royal patronages and military titles in a decision signed off by his mother, the Queen. It's also been revealed in court documents that Prince Andrew's lawyers want to interview the husband of his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, as well as her psychologist, after it was suggested that she may suffer from, quote, false memories in regard to her sexual assault claims. Those allegations, of course, Prince Andrew strongly denies, and his lawyers also want to question Mr Giuffre about claims that his wife had a role in recruiting underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein. So obviously this was a big move by the royal household to strip Prince Andrew of his titles and his patronages, and there's a report in one of the papers today that says that he's reported to be devastated, and I'm sure that's the case because of course he was a military man himself, Michael and Paul, and he really enjoyed being in those positions, so it will have hit him very hard.
22 years in the Royal Navy, distinguished military service, particularly towards the beginning of it, when he was in the Falklands War. No, it must be absolutely devastating. It's perfectly clear that he is not coming back to public life.
Yeah.
But in a way, this is no longer about Prince Andrew. I think it's about the monarchy.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, that's why these moves have been taken. But I think the monarchy, if it's thinking straight, must be very worried about its future, actually. We're obviously, coming towards big changes in the monarchy, and this sort of thing is profoundly unhelpful. And the British public will be making an assessment of the monarchy at some point in the future, and well, it really needs to get itself onto a clean sheet of paper, I guess.
I mean, they would have certainly made, as you say, a sort of assessment, and in terms of public relations, what is this doing to the image of the monarchy? And clearly it's damaging, and the Queen has acted pretty ruthlessly, not for the first time, because we saw she did a very similar thing over Harry and Meghan when she cut them loose. But I'm slightly concerned. I have no love for Prince Andrew, by the way, but we do need to remind ourselves he hasn't actually been found guilty of anything yet. He maintains his innocence, and like everybody, whether you're a duke or a pauper, you're entitled to the presumption of innocence, in my view, and you're entitled to due process. And I can imagine somebody in that position feeling slightly aggrieved that, having not been found guilty of anything, effectively has been excommunicated and drummed out of public life. But that is the way of the world these days.
I entirely agree, and I would even go further and say that I would be astonished if he was guilty of some of the things of which he's being accused. But what he clearly is guilty of is associating with sleazebags.
Yes.
And, I mean, that is what is done for him. I mean, I know it's now the court case, and that appears to be all important, but the key misjudgment was the people that he associated with and how long he maintained the association with Epstein. After Epstein had been convicted, he maintained an association. He would say that it was that he met him again in order to dissociate himself from him. But I mean, that's the heart of the matter. If you mix with scum, some of the dirt is going to rub off.
And I think the point that you make about Her Majesty the Queen, and indeed, no doubt in conversation with Prince Charles and Prince William, taking this action, it isn't the first time she's had to take very difficult decisions. She had to, early in her reign about Princess Margaret, take a very difficult decision there. And that, again, was to protect the crown. She always acts in the best interests of the monarchy, and that's why people respect her so much. They know that she is going to not do things in her interest, because she's a mother, she's a sister. I think it's very important to recognise that she does this to protect the monarchy.
And I think the Newsnight interview was clearly a car crash, wasn't it?
Total mistake.
The interview with Emily Maitlis. And I think clearly the plan was to try to ingratiate himself with the public and to give the impression, look, I'm really not caught up in all of this, I'm not a bad guy. But he did the opposite. And some of the nonsense, he said he went to see Epstein again after he'd already been convicted because he wanted to do the honourable thing. And that was his failing. Too often he wants to do the honourable thing. And he didn't show any sympathy for the victims of Epstein either. So he has undoubtedly brought much of this on himself. But again, I say, until somebody is actually found guilty of something through due process, we need to be careful, I think, about assuming they're guilty.
And do you mind if I just move it on to another aspect of the royal family? Because Prince Harry is seeking a judicial review against refusal by the Home Office to allow him to pay personally for police protection when he's in the United Kingdom. He's, of course, based now in the United States, and the Duke of Sussex says his private security team does not have adequate jurisdiction abroad.
Well, there are many celebrities that come into the United Kingdom who don't have access to Home Office briefings or intelligence, and their security staff are able to keep them safe. So I think he's again saying, I'm actually a member of the royal family and I should get better protection.
It's this entitlement theme, which I've been trying to run through the programme, as it were. But, if you decide that you are a Hollywood-based celebrity, then you have to accept the rules. You have to make enough money to pay for your own security, and that has to extend to when you visit the United Kingdom as well. I don't know what you think public reaction to this will be. I mean, I know my own reaction. I hope it's representative of the public. I think people will think that he's trying it on.
I think the optics are terrible, and I suspect that ensconced over there in California, they don't quite understand what the public mood is here. I mean, it's one thing cutting your ties effectively as a senior royal and saying, look, we're not interested in cutting ribbons and opening hospitals. We want to go and live a celebrity lifestyle rather than have a life of service. Well, you're entitled to make that decision, but then to use your royal status when it suits you, in this case to demand that the taxpayer forks out for security, I think all that's going to do is to erode his public image even more in the eyes of the British public.
Arlene,
decision.
You were alluding earlier to the position of the Queen. I mean, I think one of the remarkable things about her reign is that you've never felt that she exerted a personal entitlement.
No.
I think...
Quite the opposite, actually.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah.
I think that, unfortunately, there are quite a number of members of the royal family who do seem to have asserted a personal entitlement. And I think if that is the broad view of the public, that the royal family, excluding the Queen, has this sense of entitlement, that will be quite lethal to the royal family, as we're seeing it being lethal for Boris and lethal for Djokovic.
The answer, of course, is to abolish the monarchy and to have a democratic republic with an elected head of state,
This
like
is where
many
Paul
other
and I will
civilised
come to
countries.
blows.
If we had an elected head of state, it would almost certainly by now be Nigel Farage, and that should, I think, give you pause for thought.
But at least you could get rid of him. At the ballot box.
Do you know, I think that Macron has showed us why we're right to be a monarchy. I think so appalling to have one's head of state involved on a day-to-day basis in politics. In the case of Macron, in my view, making absurd statements, posturing and gallivanting and striking poses and grandstanding. We're spared all of that because our head of state is not a politician.
Members of the royal family are not political vacuums, though, are they? I mean, if you look at some of the public interventions that Charles makes, for example, whether it's on climate change or whatever, clearly they have their own political views and do try to set something of a political agenda. So I think it's always been a bit of a myth that the royal family isn't political. May not be party political, but clearly they have political leanings.
But certainly anybody that has to get re-elected, Michael is right about this, will always do what the like of Macron is doing. And that is not something that I want my head of state.
Let's have a compromise then. Let's abolish the monarchy, but allow the Queen to stand in an election for a president as the head of state. And if she's as popular as you say, then she'll romp home.
How very un-British.
I'm not going to compromise with you. I think we ought to take it up another day. Quite a lot of people have been getting in touch. Kevin says, I remember 40 years ago at school reading Animal Farm by George Orwell as part of my O-level English course. At the time that it was written by George Orwell, it was a parody of Soviet Russia. Who would have thought that 40 years later it could as easily apply to a British Conservative government? You may remember that the pigs lead the rebellion on behalf of the animals against the humans, but in the end, the pigs become an elite indistinguishable from the people they replaced.
A bit of English literature on GBNews this morning. But then we go back to Roy, who says, Boris has made good decisions and bad decisions. He has humanised politics. Let's give him more time.
And Sean says, I don't think Boris should be hounded out by the media. The people voted him in, and at the next general election, we could vote him out. Many broke the rules.
Bill says, no music. It's not a party, it's a meeting. Ooh, that's a soft judgment.
Yeah, indeed. And Chris then says, and I'm moving on now to the Chinese spy, the simple answer why she had such easy access is being described by the words of the great Swedish political theorist ABBA, money, money, money. So there you are. ABBA are now political theorists as well as everything else.
Well, as you know, I agree with that. On that same subject, Derek says, really, how could a spy get so close to government? This is nothing new, is it? UK history has many episodes of spies getting close to government. It's the way it is. Perhaps the Chinese are just getting very good at it, or our security services need a wee tweak.
A wee tweak.
And on Ukraine, Philip says, if Russia does invade, what are the possible impacts on the UK? Do you believe there is a similarity between the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 60s and Ukraine joining NATO and hosting possible missiles within their territories?
Interesting stuff from you at home. But we're going to move on now to the tennis star, Novak Djokovic, and he's leaving Australia after losing his appeal with the Federal Court of Australia in a last-ditch attempt to avoid deportation. Pleased to say we've been joined in the studio by our sports broadcaster, Aidan McGee. and he's going to talk us through all the details of this. Aidan, you were on the sofa last Sunday talking about this, and you're back again this Sunday.
Yeah, I stuck my neck out last Sunday about this time last week and said that this wasn't going to end well for Novak Djokovic.
Yeah.
And I felt that strongly, regardless of appeals and counter-appeals. This is a human being, a man taking on a country, a nation, an important Commonwealth country like Australia, 25 million people, notwithstanding a very large Serbian congregation as well. Having said that, this was very much a last-ditch attempt. He's due to start his defence of the title tomorrow at 9:15. We're not clear at the moment when he's going to be actually leaving Australia, but it was always a big ask anyway to try and... look, he's going for a 10th title. It was an extraordinary period of dominance over the last 14 years in Australia. It's tantamount to what Nadal achieved in France with his 12 French Open titles, even Federer at Wimbledon with 8. So it was always going to be a tough ask. If this is elite sport, Arlene, you need preparation. There are tournament players down there who've played warm-up tournaments in the last 3 weeks since Christmas to get ready for this. For him to be going through all this and be staying in a detention centre, which by all accounts is quite squalid, and then be expected to line up tomorrow to play in the Australian Open, I think it was always pushing it. But maybe he wanted to make a stand. And I'd be interested to know what the view from the sofa is in terms of the legalities here, because the Australian government appear to have gone to court and said, well, he needs to be refused entry on public health grounds. It's very nebulous. And what exactly does that mean? Is that grounded in law? What do you think, Michael?
Well, I'm rather astonished by the grounds that the Australian government chose, and I'm rather astonished, actually, that they won, because, for example, a lot of questions will now be asked about how uniformly this policy has been applied. And I always believe that a man should have his day in court. We know that Djokovic is unvaccinated, or at least we think we know that. As far as I know, he's not been a proselytiser on this. He's not been a campaigner. He was not asked whether his opinions on this had changed. But I'd like to ask you a question, Aidan. You see, I don't know anything about sport, but the one thing I thought I'd picked up was that if you are a sportsman of that quality, it is because you are entirely single-minded to your sport. Now, here's a man who's on the eve of the most epic achievement, 21 titles, and he has now sacrificed that because he wasn't vaccinated. How can he possibly have allowed any other aspect of his life to get in the way of winning that 21st title?
Well, like you, Michael, I find it astonishing. This is a huge tournament for Djokovic. If you look at it in totality, he could move, and he would have been a favourite for this if you'd asked somebody maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Not so much now because of everything he's been through, and he's up against some titanic competition as well. But 21 Grand Slams would have moved him ahead of Nadal and Federer. You would have thought that was very unlikely 10 years ago, probably even 5 years ago, when he had a bit of a lull in his career. He had a 2-week break, or 2 year sort of lull in his career where things weren't going too well for him off court. He recovered to set himself back on course to supersede even 2 of the greatest players that ever played. There's also the individual dominance at one tournament. I don't believe, as I said before, that he turned up to Australia thinking he could just blag his way in. You don't do that in places like Australia. Their migration policy, not to mention the draconian nature of their COVID restrictions, they wouldn't have let him in very easily anyway. I think he went there on the pretext of understanding that he would be allowed to take part in the tournament. But in terms of...
It's all very puzzling, isn't it? Because one of the reasons he lost my sympathy, and I think a lot of public sympathy, and it may have had political repercussions in Australia, was the allegation that he'd had COVID and then appeared in public the next day.
Well, it wasn't immediately clear that he was aware that he'd tested positive. It seemed a bit far-fetched from my perspective. One thing I'll say for the Australian government, though, is that, yes, they have got... It's a cynical view. They have got elections coming up soon, similar when Macron was flexing his muscles back in November with the migrant crisis. There was an election on the horizon. It always changed the dynamics slightly. But the court of public opinion is very much with the Australian government here and Scott Morrison. They're absolutely certain that Australians, the average Australian citizen, does not want Novak Djokovic lining up at the Australian Open tomorrow. In terms of his attitude, if we could just get back to that point, Michael, about his views on vaccination, yes, he's a peculiar character. He's not always very self-aware. Oliver Holt writes a good piece in the Mail on Sunday today in his column. He said, when I look at Novak Djokovic, and Oliver's a guy who travels around the world watching sporting events, has done for 20 years, to be fair to him. So he says, when I look at Novak Djokovic, I'm not seeing the best tennis player in the world. I'm seeing a dangerous fool. Now, that's quite a strong thing to say. I would also say that With Djokovic, it's an image problem as well, and this won't help him. What frustrates him is that when he goes around the world, he doesn't engender the same love as Rafa Nadal does and Roger Federer does, and even Andy Murray to a degree. He hasn't got that. In terms of his achievements, he deserves it, but there's something about him which rubs people up the wrong way.
Yeah.
Aidan, thank you very much indeed. And I would just say that, Djokovic has a tremendous reputation for philanthropy. Let's remember that as well. Yeah. Well, look, after the break, GB News' own Tom Harwood will be here in the studio talking to us, talking through the ongoing trans debate. That's going to be after the weather.
Let's have a look at the weather for you. The UK is looking like a mixed picture, a band of rain moving across the country. So in the details, southwest England seeing a few showers this morning, some sunny spells developing. A bit on the mild side, though, double figures for most. For the southeast of England, variable cloud. There could be the odd light shower, but most places are dry. Temperatures around average, light winds. Cloud and rain continuing to move southwards and across Wales, though perhaps Cardiff should be dry until we approach early afternoon. The temperatures there about 10 Celsius. Heading to the Midlands then, and after a bright morning, cloud and rain slowly moving in from the north as we approach midday. A little bit cooler, temperatures of about 7. That weather front will clear northern England, allowing the skies to brighten. Plenty of sunshine by lunchtime, but then a chilly northerly breeze. Highs of 7 towards the coast, sunny spells and a few scattered showers for northern parts of Scotland as well today. Elsewhere across the country, dry, plenty of sunshine. Temperatures in Edinburgh just topping at 6. Northern Ireland will see plenty of blue skies, some cloud drifting through, but it will be dry. A chilly feel to the air with temperatures of 7. For this evening, the cloud and rain will clear south. Turning colder, a frost developing not long after dark.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Well, welcome back to the Political Correction. Now, GB News' political correspondent Tom Harwood is going to join us in the studio now. During the week, Tom took to Twitter to talk about the trans debate. I know it's something that Tom feels rather strongly about. And you're here actually at my request because I was interested that you, a figure of the right, have what I would regard as rather wokish views. And genuinely, in this spirit, I wanted you to come in here and help to educate us on this issue. So you took to Twitter in particular because there was an amendment in the House of Lords which would have required women's prisons, I think, strictly to admit only biological women. The amendment, by the way, has fallen by the wayside. But shall we start with you telling us about that, and then maybe we can broaden out to your views in general on the trans debate. So what was the issue with the amendment and why were you upset by it?
Sure. I mean, you might say wokish, I might say robustly individualist. Because at the moment, the situation that happens in prisons is that prisoners are assessed, risk assessed, on an individual basis, in a case-by-case basis. There was an amendment before the Lords earlier this week that would have removed that sort of individuality and excluded all trans people from being in the prison that their gender would inform. And so that would mean you'd have a bizarre situation whereby, for example, a trans man beefed up on testosterone with enormous biceps and a beard would end up in a woman's prison, and where a trans woman who was born a male but has transitioned to be a woman, has been on estrogen, has potentially had surgery and all of these things, would end up in a male prison, and that would be potentially very, very concerning with regard to what we know goes on in prisons.
The amendment has gone away, so let's go to the heart of the matter. The cause célèbre here was it Karen White? Was that the name of the case? This was a case of a person who was remanded to a woman's prison. This was someone who'd admitted to committing rapes and had committed sexual assaults, but was remanded to a women's prison. So, for instance, when you say things are evaluated on an individual basis, unfortunately, the system fails.
It did fail, but this was before the system was changed. So the system was changed and updated in 2019, and since then there has not been a single case of sexual assault with regard to trans or people who claim that they're trans. I think Karen White has never said that they were trans at all until he or she ended up in prison. I think there's a reason to raise an eyebrow there, and I think there was a definite failing in that case back before the system was strengthened, before it was changed in 2019. I think it's important to note that in the last 3 years there's not been a single case of sexual assault in a prison.
But I assume you might share my scepticism about bureaucracies and about the state. I mean, the fact is that these mistakes will be made again and again.
I think that sometimes mistakes are made. However, when it's and that's why you need strong safeguards. I don't think that it's a reason, however, to lean so far the other way into the extremity of this particular amendment that would lead to the quite ridiculous situation whereby bearded, muscly trans men who were born women would end up in female prisons. That would be concerning. And similarly, there's going to be clearly some situations where trans women would be really at risk in a male prison. And I think that sometimes when you see discourse around this, online in particular, people jump to what their conclusion, what they think a trans person is, what they think a trans person looks like. And very often that leads to some really quite grotesque imagery of sort of, oh, it's just a man in a dress, that sort of thing. And that's really not the case. And I think if more people understood and knew potentially trans people, they wouldn't jump to those conclusions, because there are some very clear situations whereby trans women should be in women's prisons.
Tom, is it? I sit on the other side of the fence to you on this. I profoundly disagree with much of what you've argued on this. But is it? I'm interested. Is it your view that, for example, a man who says he's a woman, self-identifies as a woman, is it your view that that person is a woman?
I think that in the case of a prison, sometimes what
generally. Just put prisons aside. If a man says I'm a woman, I identify as a woman, would you regard that person as a woman?
I think my definition of woman is what society would generally see as a woman. So I think that the experience of women tends to be the case that if someone's walking down a street, right, and gets catcalled, that person is seen by society as a woman. Many trans people experience that, and indeed many women who were born women as well experience that.
So you don't necessarily agree that just because someone identifies as a woman, that the law and society should automatically treat them as women?
No, I think that sometimes this leads to the extreme and quite ridiculous examples of someone who changes nothing about how they look, how they present, how they whatever. I think that presentation...
Lots of people say they should be free to self-identify and we should treat them as women. I'm just wondering if that's your view.
I think that my view rests on how people present, and presentation and therefore societal acceptance.
So what would
follows.
be the definition, in your mind, what would be the definition of the word woman?
I think that a woman is someone that society views to be a woman. I don't think it's a particularly
So it has
difficult...
no objective biological meaning, it's simply what we believe that person to be. It's not rooted in any science, it's about public perception.
Well, I
think that's where we disagree.
And your position seems illiberal to me, because it turns out then that a woman is what a lot of other people think.
Well, I think that it's peculiar to think that we should check someone's chromosomes to then see how we should interact with that person. Everyone might have met trans people in an everyday life and not realised that they were trans. Most trans people spend a lot of effort trying to assimilate in that way.
No, sure, but that doesn't necessarily... So, for example, I'm in my 40s now. I might have a part of my brain that would rather... but that feels 21. And I might want to live the life of a 21-year-old, and I might like the law and society to treat me as a 21-year-old. But I dare say that if I said to you, Tom, I feel 21, I want you to treat me as a 21-year-old, you'd probably laugh at me, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think that is...
So what's the difference?
There is a significant difference here, and that is that through every society, through millennia, the human experience has found people, a very small proportion of people, and I think it's right that we emphasise here in this conversation just how small a proportion of people we're talking about and how ridiculous it is that often this debate blows up into being such a significant political issue, because it is about a very small number of individuals. But across every society, throughout the annals of human history, there have been people who are transgender, who have sought to change their own way in which they live life. And this is just a fundamental of the human experience.
If there were to be a Tom Harwood law, what would it say on this matter?
I really don't want there to be more laws. I think that one of the big problems in this debate, and some of the people that agree with me in terms of I think that society should be more accepting towards trans people, sometimes they jump on the legislative bandwagon, and you've had horribly illiberal laws in places like Canada that have mandated how people should use pronouns. I think that is horribly illiberal and anti-individualist. And I'm coming to this from an individualist point of view. I think that basically what we need to do is foster a greater understanding in society and be more polite in general.
Would you expect my 11-year-old daughter, if she were changing in a sports centre and a biological man walked in but identified as a woman, would you expect her to remain in that changing room because she should treat that person as a woman?
I don't know what you mean there by a biological man, because there's actually some really interesting research.
You don't know what I mean by biological man?
Well, so for example, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Do you mean someone that looks like you, that walks in with a big beard and whatever? I think that would be peculiar.
Think everybody watching this programme will know what a biological man is.
Right. So, for example, there's a situation whereby in changing rooms and in bathrooms, we've seen masculine lesbian women who might have hairy armpits and whatever be forced out because people feel uncomfortable, whereas trans women tend to not be forced out.
Tom and Paul, we're going to have to end it there. And
we'll go to the
I think
pub
the difficulty is there's been a mismatch between gender and sex, and for me, that's the big difference. If people want to identify as a certain gender, that's a matter for them, but that does not make them an adult female.
I'm really pleased that we've had this discussion. I invited you on. I feel half-educated. I'd like you to complete it another day.
Good. OK, thank you, Tom, as always. And after the break, we're going to be we're going to be looking at common ground with the Imam Ashmal Mazur. Thank you.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. We've been inundated today with your views, and we wanted to give more of those to you. Michael.
We were talking about the monarchy, weren't we? Linda says, I really hope that we retain the monarchy, as when I look at the United States and see what we could end up with as head of state, it scares me to death.
Well, that was going through my mind, actually, when Paul was talking as well. So, on the national anthem, Martin says, what a great idea to play the national anthem on GB News. Why not? We desperately need some patriotism.
And on Prince Harry, my doppelganger, Janice says he's using a sort of emotional blackmail to the Queen, wanting to bring his children and keep them safe. Really, how much lower can he and his wife stoop? His title should be taken away. Another one.
So, we had mentioned Boris Johnson earlier in the programme. Trevor says Boris has been too protective of these civil servants who may work for the government but not necessarily have the same political views, who then sell their stories to the media after sitting on them for up to 2 years. The whistleblowers should also face the sack. I think the common accusation actually is that he's put a whole lot of people in Downing Street who do agree with him, and that has been part of the problem. But of course, we know that there may be an allusion there to Dominic Cummings.
Yes, indeed. And then on trans, finally, Angela says, if a person has fully transitioned surgery, then I think they should go into the prison of their new gender. However, someone self-identifying should not, as this is very open to abuse. And I think that's the point Paul was making. So we're moving on now for today's Common Ground, where we talk to a religious leader about what matters to them in their community. And joining us this morning is Imam Ashmal Mazur. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know there's a couple of stories that you wanted to mention, so over to you.
Good morning. I'm sorry about my location. I was cycling in Doncaster, and then I found a restaurant, and I have taken over their upstairs attic for a few minutes just to speak to you guys. So please forgive me for the noise and the lighting and the background. I want to talk about Boris Johnson and our British politics and its state right now. Boris Johnson, unfortunately, has come to the end of the road as far as I'm concerned. He should resign, not because of politics, but because of the ethical issues that govern, I believe, our day-to-day and political interaction. If I don't have any trust in my parliamentarians, if I don't have any trust in my prime minister, who says one thing, does something very different, lies often, as a person of faith, a person who represents a faith community, it's very difficult for us to stomach such an immoral existence on such high office. So on the basis of those very simple criteria of not lying, not cheating, and not taking us for a ride or making us to appear like fools, I think Boris Johnson should simply say, with dignity and honor, guys, I'm really sorry, I've got it wrong, and goodbye. So that would be my first and the foremost one. I don't know what you feel about it, but I'm pretty certain you've got your views. But I believe the country is ready for it, and we need to have a new start to our country. And of course, it's the new year. It's a good point to start that way.
I think many people, Imam, may have had a change of mind recently about Boris Johnson. The parties seem to have been a kind of new frontier with lots of people. But I wonder, in your own case, have you had these strong doubts about Boris Johnson for a rather longer period? I mean, it may be said that he's not given a very good moral example in all sorts of ways, including maybe his private life. So I'm just trying to investigate the origins of your belief. Is it because of what's happened recently, or are you kind of going on his life record?
I've never called for his resignation until recently. I may have had disagreements politically with him on faith and moral principles. But politically speaking, for the first time, I'm actually calling for his resignation quite openly. I've even tweeted and made social media comments about it, saying if a person in the highest office of our country cannot live with the very basic standard of telling the truth and being honest with the public and the voters, they should go. Regardless of my belief in the past, I didn't actually tell anybody to ask for his resignation, but now I'm calling for it openly. And I believe the country is doing the same thing. He may have got away with things he has done. Of course, we all do mistakes and wrongs. But you know, in our lives, when we think everything is going to be okay just because I can lie and I can lie my way out, eventually those lies will catch up and they will really bring you down and you'll fall like a ton of bricks from the skies. And that's what's happened to Boris Johnson.
Okay, well, we've spent a lot of time talking about it this morning, as you can imagine, but your second story is about Novak Djokovic.
Indeed. And again, it's another story that bothers me a lot. Firstly, he's a public figure, and not only a public figure, a well-known anti-vax person. He's been talking about not vaccinating, he hasn't taken it himself, etc., etc. And then to try and enter a country with such strict vaccination as well as COVID rules, I think it's a bit silly, I believe. And I am on the side of the Australian government in this case for firstly revoking his visa and ordering him to be deported. We should make an example of a leading figure like that so that, okay, at a personal level, you can have that choice. You may not want to vaccinate, that's not a problem. But to spread misinformation, to tell people not to vaccinate, to put people's lives at risk, and then to push a country's boundary and expect that they should be making an exception for you, that smacks a little bit hypocritical. And again, from a faith perspective, I think all faith would agree with me, whether you are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or any other for that matter, that this is not acceptable. He should actually have not gone there in the first place. And the Australian government has done the right thing.
Now, may I ask you, do you use your authority within your community to urge your community to get vaccinated? And if that is what you've been doing, what success have you had?
Well, I don't use my authority, but I use my persuasion power or convincing power to tell people that it is a good thing. In the Islamic faith, whenever you're making a decision, you have to weigh up the pros and the cons, like in any other. There is a classical Islamic principle which says maslaha and mafsada, benefit and harm. If benefit outweighs the harm, you must do that thing. And if the harm outweighs the benefit, then you should not do it. Vaccination benefit outweighs harm. Very few people have died because of it. Very few people have suffered side effects. I suffer side effects when I take aspirin. So medication comes with side effects, but the greater benefit in the overall community is very important. So I have been speaking about it. So for example, as a trustee of Britain's first mosque in Liverpool, Abdullah Quilliam Mosque, we've been running vaccination center from our mosque. I've been speaking from the pulpit. I've been doing interviews, writing about it. I've been encouraging people to come and do vaccination and get their families vaccinated and protect themselves and protect the society at large. Well, that is, in my view, a faith and a moral requirement and an obligation on everyone.
Switching subject, Imam, the Harry Potter actress Emma Watson has been accused of anti-Semitism after she posted an image on Instagram showing a pro-Palestinian protest with a banner saying "Solidarity is a verb." Danny Danon, former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, said 10 points from Gryffindor for being an anti-Semite. What did you make of that?
I think Danny is conflating his political position. This is a political position that Israeli government has taken for years. This particular actress, Emma, she has every right to hold a particular political view. Supporting Palestinians and their right to freedom, their right to a state, their right to rule of law, their right to living without occupation isn't anti-Semitic at all. In fact, it is part and parcel of the Israeli-Palestinian coexistence struggle, and we all support the rights of both Israelis and Palestinians to live side by side as equal citizens and as equal human beings in this Holy Land. Remember, Holy Land is shared between Christians, Muslim, Jews for hundreds of years, if not thousands. Suddenly, one party to say that the other party's struggle to survive is anti-Semitic, it's very politicized. I don't think it is correct. Criticizing Israeli government and its occupation and its breach of international laws and its obligations to the Palestinians as well as its own Palestinian citizens is not anti-Semitism at all. What is not acceptable under any circumstances is to select a people by their faith or by their race and be prejudicial or racial about it. And I will stand, to defend the rights of my Jewish friends and my Jewish neighbors for their existence and for their right to roam free, just like I would stand for anybody in any part of the world. So to say Emma Watson and her tweet was anti-Semitic is very cheap, is very underhanded, and it smacks of politicizing a campaign. We should all stand together with the Palestinians' people's right to also have a country of their own.
But is it not the case, Imam, that often we see this happening? If you're pro one campaign, that must mean that you're against another campaign, or if you're pro one country, you're against something. I mean, I see it all the time in Northern Ireland, you cannot support all people, you have to be in one camp or the other, which I think is part of what's going on here.
Correct, and we saw that with Bush and Blair's Iraq war, the illegal war. You are with us or you're against us. Remember that infamous statement made by Bush. Apparently God was speaking to him. I am a man of God in the sense that I am a faithful person. God doesn't speak to me. If anything, those whispers that he had probably was whispers from the devil. You don't speak like that to the humanity at large. We can all have multiple positions, multiple supporting campaign, and multiple views. I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a husband. I'm all of this. I'm an imam and a citizen. I can be against some policies of the Conservative Party, and I can be pro some policies of the Conservative Party, likewise others. Palestinian campaign and people of Jewish background, their campaign of any person, you can support them. You can't be silenced just because you are criticizing bad behavior of one of them. For me as a Muslim, I must stand with justice and fairness, even if it's against my own father, against my own self-interest. And that's what Emma Watson's statement shows. She was prepared to stand for what is right. And Danny, unfortunately, is blinded by his emotion, is blinded by his own blind support for Israeli illegal activities in the occupied territories, and he's not able to divide the two. And that's a sad development. We need to all come back together, stand for solidarity of all people's freedom in all parts of the world.
Man, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Obviously, there'll be a variety of views, and we're very pleased to hear yours this morning. Thank you.
Moving on to a story that really caught my attention. A German court has sentenced a Syrian colonel to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity in an historic trial. Anwar Raslan was linked to the torture of over 4,000 people in Syria's civil war in a jail known as Hell on Earth.
The trial in Koblenz is the world's first criminal case brought over state-led torture in Syria. UN Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet praised the conviction as a landmark leap forward in pursuit of truth. So, Michael, this was something that you brought to our attention this morning. It was something that you felt was very noteworthy.
Yes, the accused was not a German citizen. The victims were not German citizens. The crimes did not occur in Germany. Universal principles were used to bring this defendant to court. Incidentally, he had passed as a refugee into Germany, having been associated very strongly with the regime in this very brutal way, as we know. He had fallen out with the regime, and he was mixing with other refugees. He was identified by some of his victims.
Oh, my goodness.
And the victims and human rights lawyers got him into court, where the victims gave testimony. Just to remind you, rapes, sexual assaults, 58 murders, over 4,000 cases of torture. Now, most fascinating because this doesn't happen very often. It's an enormous precedent. I mean, it kind of warms the heart to think that these people who do terrible things and think they will never be brought to justice may now feel a shudder because this man has been brought to justice. I would also say that this advance of human rights and the advance of the idea that universal principles can be brought forward in courts could have implications in democracies as well. We were talking about constraints on ministers. 25 years ago, I was a defence secretary, and sometimes I was taking aggressive action against other countries. And I was warned even then that if I did not have international authority for what I was doing, I could eventually be accused, probably in a civil court, of having unlawfully taken life. So although this is, a wonderful judgment from the point of view of dealing with dictators, I think it will also be read with great interest in democracies who may think that in future some of their breadth of authority will also be trammelled.
I mean, I think importantly, as you touched on, it's the message it sends that actually if you are guilty of these sorts of wicked crimes and this barbarity, you don't get a free pass. If you travel to another country and think you're going to live out your life in freedom and comfort, then we can come for you. And I would imagine there, on the back of this, are quite a few military people, politicians around the world who might be worried. But I do think, exactly what you said, Michael, we do need to guard against the possibility that this law could be abused. If other politicians who have taken decisions in good faith, set foot in a country, and for whatever reason, political reasons, that country's regime decides that it wants to apprehend them, then could they use this judgment perhaps as a way of doing that? We did it for this guy, why not do it for this guy as well? That's where I think we need to be cautious.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, but bringing us back right to the beginning, where do we think Boris Johnson is going to be at the end of this week?
He'll probably be in Marbella or in the Bahamas or somewhere in retirement. Maybe not by the end of this week.
No, I don't think it's going to happen by the end of this week.
No. But I think he probably is on his way out before too long. I think he has probably tipped into the point now of having lost moral authority.
Well, I think before too long is a very elastic term. I don't know how long it's going to take. I rather think I know what the conclusion is. But, Theresa May lasted a very long time after most of us thought that she was finished. I don't think he has the initiative. We've been talking about all the announcements he's going to make, but some papers say that there are 35 letters in already, and you only need 54. I'm alluding to the letters into the chairman of the 1922 Backbench Committee that would trigger a vote of confidence. So one possibility is that the number of letters begins to trickle upwards, and I don't know that anybody has control of that process.
Yeah. And do we really need a leadership election? Because that's what it will be. I mean, this will not be a coronation. I don't think anybody expects that.
Well, one of the things that may cement him in his position is the absolute lack of enthusiasm for the other candidates.
Yes.
Well, as a Labour person, I'm always up for a bit of regicide in the Tory party, but none of the other candidates instill any confidence in me, I have to say.
Paul, we're going to have to leave it there. That's all from us today. Thank you for all of your comments and views throughout the morning. The Political Correction team will be back here again next Sunday from 10. Up next is Alistair Stewart and friends.
Let's have a look at the weather for you. The UK is looking like a mixed picture, a band of rain moving across the country. So in the details, southwest England seeing a few showers this morning, some sunny spells developing. A bit on the mild side, though, double figures for most. For the southeast of England, variable cloud. There could be the odd light shower, but most places are dry. Temperatures around average, light winds. Cloud and rain continuing to move southwards and across Wales, though perhaps Cardiff should be dry until we approach early afternoon. The temperatures there about 10 Celsius. Heading to the Midlands then, and after a bright morning, cloud and rain slowly moving in from the north as we approach midday. A little bit cooler, temperatures of about 7. That weather front will clear northern England, allowing the skies to brighten. Plenty of sunshine by lunchtime, but then a chilly northerly breeze. Highs of 7 towards the coast. Sunny spells and a few scattered showers for northern parts of Scotland as well today. Elsewhere across the country, dry, plenty of sunshine. Temperatures in Edinburgh just topping at 6. Northern Ireland will see plenty of blue skies. Some cloud drifting through, but it will be dry. A chilly feel to the air with temperatures of 7. For this evening, the cloud and rain will clear south, turning colder, a frost developing not long after dark.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching